So part of the University of Nebraska College of Medicine Centennial, it's my pleasure to interview Dr. John Latta, a gentleman who's been here on campus for a long, long time. Indeed, when did you come on campus, Dr. Latta?
September 1st, 1921.
1921.
Yeah,
And you received your PhD
at Cornell.
at Cornell. And what did you do when you first came here in 1921?
I taught embryology and tissue histology.
Rheology, tissue. And what was the nature of the basic sciences when you first came? Was it very large?
There was almost a full year of anatomy, gross and microscopic anatomy, and embryology. The only other subject taught in that first year was bacteriology, as it was then called. And that was a course of about half a semester. Otherwise, it was all anatomy.
All anatomy?
Yeah.
Okay. And what was your first position?
My first position was assistant professor of anatomy.
Assistant professor, okay.
And that, within 3 years, became an associate professor. And at the end of another 3 years, it was a full professor.
Now, primarily on campus, there was the North Laboratory Building.
That was, they had a North Laboratory Building, a South Laboratory Building, and the first unit of the University Hospital.
Those were the three pieces
Yeah.
that were here at that time.
Yeah.
There was also a nursing.
Well, there was a building, a stucco building, back of the first unit, which was called a nursing home. And I remember that actually burned down, and they were building a counting hall, which was the first really nursing home that they had here. That was being built when I came.
How large was the hospital in those days, just roughly?
Oh, I suppose it must have been about 60 patients, something like that.
60 patients.
Yeah. It was not very large. And the corridors were, between beds, was so slight that they really made a mistake on that, I think, because it made it difficult to move beds around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But practically all the activities, professional activities were done in the North Building. The dean's office was there, the library was there, every basic science laboratory was there. And I remember in my quarters, which I occupied, there was a bunch of shelving which had been the library. I mean, it was just a very small room. But that had been, when the first unit of the hospital was built, then they moved the library up to the second floor of the hospital. And that was still pretty small, but they had some very valuable material because we had several people who took trips to Europe frequently, like, well, I can't remember all the names, but one of them was commissioned by Dr. Cutter, who was the dean when I came, to buy anything he thought looked good, and they in some way they'd pay for it. So we had a lot of very fine historical material, historical medical material, from the banks of the Seine and places like that.
From all over?
Yeah, from all over Europe, that's right.
In the 20s, what was the size of the College
the
of
first
Medicine
year
class?
I was here, we had 96 students.
96.
And they're all along, they had long tables, and the lighting was rather poor, and everybody had to have a substage lighting on his microscope.
Substage lighting?
And the microscopes had to be put in a special storage place because they didn't have any microscope lockers. Mm-hmm. Now, when you came to school, we had individual tables for the students, you may remember, but that wasn't true in those days.
But you had 90-some students?
But we had the same number of students we had all the way through, practically. There was one year that we had 105 students, I remember that.
Did that last, the number of students and the size of the class, in the 20s? What about in the 30s? Did the class size change at all?
Class size did not change, no,
Did not change.
at all, no.
What
Now,
about,
finally we went down to about 84 students.
and the teaching curriculum? You mentioned the first year was gross anatomy, uh,
Embryology.
and bacteriology.
Yeah.
What was the second year in the 20s?
Well, now, that also included histology and organology.
Organology.
Which we now call microscopic anatomy.
And the second year got into biochemistry?
And biochemistry and physiology primarily.
Primarily.
And general pathology.
And clinical years were then the third and the fourth?
Yeah.
Okay, and that sort of remained that way as a curriculum in the 20s, 30s?
Well, as I recall it, that's true.
Okay.
That's true.
Okay.
And they had some clinical pathology, of course, in the second years. Sort of an introduction to clinical activities, but not very much. But we had a real good basic science curriculum, I thought, right from the day I came here. I thought that it was very well done. Yeah. And of course, there have been advances made, but still, that we had a solid foundation in anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and pathology, general pathology.
First 2 years of medicine.
In the first 2 years of medicine. And I still think that was a very, very good beginning on which to build a clinical experience.
Let's talk for a moment about the experiences of the student. Now, Dr. Holyoke, in his memoirs, spoke of your class in embryology as a great elimination course.
Well, yeah, at least the students thought that was true.
The students thought.
Yes, but and it was to a degree because we did not have the means of evaluating pre-medical students that we had. Now, if you had 2 years of medicine, and you knew somebody on the campus, you probably would be a student in medical school. And some of those people were not fitted, didn't have the background to study medicine. It takes some background in order to enter into the study of medicine. As a result, we did have a high failure rate during the first 8 weeks. Now, we had this course in embryology in the first 8 weeks, and the course in bacteriology was the same 8 weeks. And the professor of bacteriology and I both agreed that the man wasn't up to par, why he wasn't in the next year, that's all. But we tried very hard to get through, nevertheless. And I think in both departments we spent a lot of time in the laboratory with the students. I know we still did it when you were in school, I'm sure.
That's right. You spanned, what, 55 years here on campus?
Well, let's see, it started in 21 and I retired fully in 1966.
I thought it was later. You were the emeritus professor for a while also, weren't you?
I was what?
Did you come as a part-time professor after that?
Well, I can check you up on that because the rules of the university demand that you retire from an administrative post at 65, the age 65, which I did, and that was in 1960, because I was born in 1895. Then we were permitted to spend on a year-by-year basis up to 3 years teaching your course. And at the end of the 3 years, one was supposed to retire fully. But Dr. Lemon, who was the head of the Cancer Institute, the Epic Cancer Institute at that time, he said, well, why don't you come over to my place and we'll continue your salary and you can work in the put up an electron microscope and work in an electron microscope laboratory. And I finally agreed to do that, and I spent 3 very, very pleasant years in that department in the Cancer Institute. And I should say that they finally caught up with me and decided that I should retire because there had an opinion at one time that the funds for the castrate were not part of the university funds, and they discovered finally that they were part of the university fund, and therefore I would have to retire. And I was willing to retire. There's no hard feelings about that at all.
But during all these years, then, you saw many, many medical students come through here.
Oh, yeah, indeed. I really have never counted up how many there were, but I am very happy to say I think practically every one of them is a friend of mine at the present time that's still living. A good many of them are already dead.
And you always tend to remember the students' names, too.
Why, that was an attitude that I practiced very thoroughly. But right now, I'm afraid I'm beginning to slip a little bit.
I think this
That
morning,
I can remember the looks of them, but I don't remember the names always. Yeah.
This morning I referred to you as an old man. I think you corrected me. You said you were elderly. You were right. You were right.
Well, I'm not a young man, that's for sure. That's absolutely right.
What changes did you see on campus as far as teaching and training the basic sciences?
Well, I see quite a change in the appearance of the students, even. The students pass me in the hall, and they just don't look like medical students to me anymore. Now, I'm old. I admit I'm old-fashioned and set in my ways and all that sort of thing. But I hate to see people with long beards and hair slicked back over their ears and leather jackets. And we used to tell the students, you know, well, that's unbecoming of a future doctor. If they'd come to class with that kind of clothes on. And they accepted that. And nowadays, I suspect there's a little bit of fear about the students now that professors didn't have in my day, because we knew we were running the show. And we knew that what the students should learn. Now, I suspect there's somewhat of an attitude of, well, let the student decide what he should learn. And the students occasionally seem to demand that they be taught this, that, or the other thing, whether you think they should, or the administration thinks they should or not. That's the only bad attitude that I notice in the present category of medical students. I think I've even suggested to the authorities that there should be a little more emphasis on the basic sciences as a base on which to build your clinical knowledge. And I still think that there's so much being learned in clinical medicine that they think they have to learn all these details, but in doing so, they tend to neglect or shorten or cramp the experiences in basic sciences like anatomy and physiology and chemistry, which if you don't understand them, you don't understand clinical medicine. That's all there is to it.
You know, you focus on understanding. I recall very vividly as a freshman here in 1953, you used to utilize a hose and a towel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The embryological development of the omentum, I believe it was.
You know, you've asked me to go over that rotation of the gut and the mesenteries, but I'm sure that couldn't be done in a period of this length. It takes a couple of lectures of an hour length to do that, and it's very fascinating, and it's absolutely essential to understand. If you're going to work inside the abdominal cavity, you certainly have to understand the rotation of the gut. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed such lectures. I think it's that that embryology as a subject is a real challenge to a student's imagination. And you didn't understand it, why you were in a lot of trouble. And eventually, when you did understand it, then a great light dawned. And it was always a great pleasure to me to have a student come in and say, well, now I begin to understand what this is all about. And I do believe that every educated man ought to know something about how he developed. And particularly true if he's going to be a medical doctor. One other thing I might mention, Frank, and that is I think it's the duty of every teacher in a medical school to try to get the students to understand something beside the actual facts of medicine, but how to treat people, how to understand people. And I always bore down a little on that, and when I was actually teaching students. And I think most of the students felt gratified to have such interest shown in their welfare.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. I think when I had you as a professor, I was rather frightened.
Yeah.
But there was never a concern as to the quality of your teaching, the concern you had for us as individuals, and the idea of what it takes to get the complete physician.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I'm referring to.
It was rather hard to grasp in those days, but you pushed us in that direction.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of boys learned just how to act, for one thing, with their peers. I still remember the occasion where a student came rushing out of the laboratory. I was going down the hall toward my office, and he said, "Say, Latta." And I stopped right there, and I said, "Well, Mr. Wickstrom, if you really want to be familiar with me, my first name is John." Well, he got the message right then. Mm-hmm. Now, he came right out of the hayfield, and he didn't know how to act, and he soon learned, that's all. That's one of the ways of learning. And I think he really appreciated my telling that. It has been a very fascinating career.
Has it been a fulfilling career for you?
Oh, every student I ever taught, if he comes to town, it seems like he comes to see me. And thanks for that's what I call real appreciation. And I do appreciate their attitude toward me as their professor.
I guess over these 50 plus years, you've given a lot of yourself too.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way. I hope most students feel that way, because I really tried, and I think I knew a little something, so that there was some success in the trial.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr.
It's
Latta,
my pleasure. My pleasure.
Your long and distinguished career here at the University of Preston College.
Well, I appreciate your opportunity you've given me to tell something of my career.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.